Welcome back to Extra Literary Affairs. This is episode 4 of our Stream of Consciousness September series. Today, Joey and I are rekindling our affair with the extraordinary Clarice Lispector and her hypnotic short story, The Egg and the Chicken. This was originally published in Portuguese in 1967, a Brazilian literary magazine, and this story is anything but ordinary. It's more of a metaphysical meditation wrapped in poetic prose, and it's pure Lispector. I found it really hard to understand, Joey. Now, if you've been with us for a while, you might remember our earlier rendezvous with her and her story, The Smallest Woman in the World. Think of today's episode as part 2 of our ongoing literary entanglement with one of Brazil's most beguiling minds. Her writing defies genre. It's often labeled as stream of consciousness, but it's more like stream of being. Her work doesn't explain, it purely evokes emotion, as I said, very confusing. And to read her is to feel a soul thinking. So, Joey, before I go any further, what was your initial impression or experience you had reading The Egg and the Chicken?
To me, this is like quintessential modernism. I mean, it doesn't get more modernist than this, in my opinion. I mean, I don't think she's revered as one of like the most famous modernist authors, probably because she was from Brazil. So she's sort of out of the American canon or the European canon. Obviously, there's a lot of people in there from there. This is obviously super difficult to follow, and it's very dense, and you're not really sure, like, what are you trying to say here? Because there's obviously a reason. You didn't just write this because you were like, I don't know, I'm kind of bored today. Let me just write something about an egg and a chicken. The relationship between the two of them and how they coexist. Is the egg real? Did I do drugs before I read this? It feels just very strange, and you're not really sure which way is up. But what I found really interesting is as I was rereading it, and I do have to continue to reread it. I think this is one of those stories that you have to reread throughout your life. Just keep revisiting it and seeing what sticks out to you. Maybe you interpret something different. Maybe a new line becomes more relevant to you. But as I was rereading it, I had spent a decent amount of time between my first read and my second read. And during that time, I spent a lot of energy contemplating, what does this mean? Because it's baffling. I really hope everyone reads it. It's very short, but it's just really hard. When I started to decide what I think she was trying to say, when I was figuring out my interpretation, by the time I got to my second read, I had that in mind as I was reading it now. And it felt very clear. Well, maybe not super clear, but it became clearer. It made it easier to understand because I was using my interpretation as a lens during my reading experience. And this is something that you have brought up outside of our podcast or other conversations, where you were saying how this is like an experiential reading, where it's about the experience of reading and maybe less about being aware of what is being said and just allowing yourself to go along for the ride.
I want to circle back to that because I took a note to myself when I first read this. I'm like, it's incomprehensible. There's a lot going on. It felt like philosophy. It felt like there was some feminist things. There were things about like, what does it mean to be a woman? And there were just so many pieces to it. But what was really interesting for me, Joey, I want to read a quote because I was like, I must be doing this right. So she tells us in this story, since it is impossible to understand, I know that if I understand it, this is because I am making an error. Understanding is the proof of error. Understanding it is not the way to see it. Joey, the reason I bring that up, it's like, hi, I am messing with you as the author. And as we said in our intro, no, it is not the American version of the chicken and the egg. She specifically flips it on its tail and it says it's the egg and the chicken. And the fact that you said, oh, it's kind of like that riddle, which came first, the chicken and the egg. I'm like, we're never going to solve this riddle. And she sets up her entire story to be like, I'm just going to throw a lot of stuff at you. There's no right answer, but you could continually debate what this story is about for a really long time. And like you, I read it several times because I'm like, what is this story actually about? And I still don't have a concrete answer for that, Joey, but I'm really curious what you walked away thinking if you were going to have a very succinct explanation. I've never read the story before, Joey. Tell me what it's about. You would say,
I honestly, I agree that I think it's the experience of reading this because I've been thinking about like how would I summarize this, and I think it's just philosophical, really, and it's really hard to say what it's about because I think with modernist literature, at least to me, I think it leaves so much room open for reader interpretation that it could really mean anything. The egg and the chicken can represent two different things or can represent different things to different people. So we're gonna about to show people how that worked for us. But I think it's so specific to your experience and your lived experience and what's going on with you in that moment of your life while you're reading that I don't think I can even summarize it because it's so personal to the reader. So for me, it was about Clarice Lispector's idea of what the meaning of our existence is, which is very strange. If you read this, I do want to read the first page, which is like just the first page of the ebook version, just to give people an idea of like, what does this sound like? Why are we saying this is so difficult? This is going to be something that I'm going to probably trip up reading. It's hard to read out loud because it's not typical prose. Like it's not structured the same way as we'd be able to easily read.
Joey, can I stop you for one moment? Because I would love to give a short summary that someone who is not either one of us did of the egg and the chicken. Are you down for that? And then we will read her prose, or do you want to do that
You
secondarily?
could give the summary because I'm curious as to how someone thinks this is going to be summarized.
Yes, someone else has created this tidbit for us. In The Egg and the Chicken, Clarice Lispector transforms a simple metaphor into a philosophical labyrinth. The story begins with the familiar paradox, which we've mentioned: what came first, the egg or the chicken? But quickly spirals into a meditation on existence, identity, and the elusive nature of origin. Lispector's narrator is haunted by the egg, which becomes a symbol of potential, of something not yet born but already present. The chicken, meanwhile, is both literal and metaphorical, a creature that lays eggs, yet is also born from those eggs. This cyclical tension mirrors the narrator's own struggle to define herself, to locate the beginnings of her consciousness, her femininity, and her being. Ultimately, The Egg and the Chicken isn't about solving the riddle. It's about exploring the limits of logic and embracing the mystery of becoming. It's a story that asks not just what came first, but who am I and how do I know? Joey, I thought that was a great summary because we get it, but we probably couldn't have articulated it in that
Mm.
clear way.
I mean,
One thing I did want to say about this is that unlike some of the other translations that we have had, like when you think of Borges or of other Spanish speaking, or in this case, Portuguese speaking writers, there are no difficult points of language. Her language is pretty straightforward. The words that she chooses or the words that are put here through the translation are pretty clear cut. So that was not where we were getting hung up. It's like, what in the world with all these circles of circles of circles are you trying to say? So, Joey, I would love to get your response to that.
that's a good summary. I still don't think it really tells you what's going on in this story. I don't even feel like it's really a story. It feels more like an essay, really, because there's really literally nothing happens. And not that it has to, but especially with like something that's literary fiction, usually there's not like a plot for the most part. It's usually a character development or something like that, but we don't even have a character. It's sort of just a meandering kind of philosophical labyrinth feels like the best description for this. It feels very much like a labyrinth, like we're in someone's head and we're like, wow, you have a lot of deep thoughts here, madam. And that's hard to decode.
I appreciate that you said that because I feel that like the narrator is one character. The chicken is a character in some ways because she
Yeah.
transitions to calling it like she and her. And it's just a very interesting thing. And like the narrator says a very specific thing that she uses the word I, and I'm sure we'll go into that later. And it might even come up in the page that you're going to read to us to kick off just a little sampler of what her literary style is like. But I think your idea that it's a labyrinth, and yeah, sometimes you run into a brick wall because I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
not down with what you just told me. I do not understand it. And other things I was like, exactly. Thank you for describing what it might be like to be a woman 1967. Thank you, Clarice. You nailed
Yeah.
it. And other parts, I'm like, philosophy is not for me, at least not this version.
Yeah, I will say that because I've read 3 of her novels now, and I've read some more of her short stories. So I'm more familiar than when we first started with Clarice Lispector with her body of work. And I will say that usually pretty dense, especially The Passion According to GH is the hardest book I've ever read. Okay, including Ulysses. Maybe Finnegan's Wake. I have not read Finnegan's Wake, which I have no intention of reading that. That sounds like a torture. That would probably be harder. Maybe, I don't know. But it was definitely the hardest thing I've ever read. But I will say that even though her works tend to be very dense, except for The Smallest Woman in the World, that's pretty straightforward. I think what you said, like, you're sort of running into brick walls, but then you get this moment of clarity where you're like, oh my goodness, I know exactly what you mean. That's exactly how I feel. I've never articulated this maybe in this exact way. And it feels there is like a connection between you and the author in those moments. She's really worth reading altogether, but even if it's for these little moments of connection where she understands something innately about you and you're like, we've never met. But I do want to read the first page of the ebook version. In the morning, in the kitchen, on the table, I see the egg. I look at the egg with a single gaze. Immediately, I perceive that one cannot be seeing an egg. Seeing an egg never remains in the present. As soon as I see an egg, it already becomes having seen an egg 3 millennia ago. At the very instant of seeing the egg, it is the memory of an egg. The egg can only be seen by one who has already seen it. When one sees the egg, it is too late. An egg seen is an egg lost. Seeing the egg is the promise of one day eventually seeing the egg. A brief and indivisible glance. If indeed there is thought, there is none. There is the egg. Looking is the necessary instrument that, once used, I shall discard. I shall keep the egg. The egg has no itself. Individually, it does not exist. Seeing the egg is impossible. The egg is supervisible just as there are supersonic sounds. No one can see the egg. Does the dog see the egg? Only machines see the egg. The construction crane sees the egg. When I was ancient, an egg landed on my shoulder. Love for the egg cannot be felt either. Love for the egg is supersensible. We do not know that we love the egg. When I was ancient, I was the keeper of the egg, and I would tread lightly to avoid upending the egg's silence.
I just want to finish that last bit of the paragraph because you said, when I was ancient, I was keeper of the egg, and I would tread lightly to avoid upending the egg's silence. When I died, they removed the egg from me with care. It was still alive. Only one who saw the world would see the egg. Like the world, the egg is obvious. And that's the end of that paragraph. What in the world
Yeah.
is going on there?
I know you're talking about an egg, but I don't know.
Well, are you
Yeah.
talking about an egg? Are you talking about society? Are you talking about the ever changing nature of time? Are you talking about being alive, being dead? Are those two separate states? Are you talking about a woman's right to control her own body because it said when she died, they still harvested the egg out of this chicken? I'm like, Clarice, babe, throw us a line. We need some additional information here to figure out where you're taking us. Luckily for us, she keeps throwing it out and bringing it back and throwing it out. She's like, oh, you didn't get me the first time? Let me just tell you from a separate angle. And I thought that was very fun and playful, but I think you and I both enjoy having some mastery of the material that we're reading. We're like, oh, I get it. That's a symbol. That's a philosophy. It's, alliteration, all these things. We know what we're getting into. And I'm like, nope, not this time.
Yeah, I mean, we get that the egg is important. Whatever it may symbolize, it's repeated nonstop throughout the entire text.
But Joey, what just popped into my head, and it's like, and another thing Clarice does, she has this beautiful moment that she said, like, an egg is a concept. And if you can't conceive of the egg as a concept, the fact that you conceived of it made it real. But once you make it real, it's not the real egg, it's a symbol of an egg. And I was like, okay, that's pretty confusing.
Yeah,
And
that's
one of the
cyclical.
most beautiful Right. And one of the most beautiful things in this that I was like, wow, how interesting. She talks about a man eternities ago who drew a symbol of an egg with a stick in the dirt. And she said, with his bare foot, erased it. And I thought, what's that? I have a mental image of that. What is that about?
Yeah, it was.
I don't think he created an egg, but he created the symbolism of an egg, but then he obliterated it. And why did you say that?
Yeah, I think what I was alluding to in the beginning here of our conversation was that I think that this is about creativity and how that is the purpose of living and that's the purpose of our existence here on earth. If you're looking for one, the egg represents creativity that is inside all of us, and it is our job and our purpose to put it out into the world. And so as I was reading it this time, that is the lens that I was reading through. And so when she's talking about this distortion of time, which she does do in other works as well. So I think this is like a common theme that she will do, saying like, if you see an egg today, you see an egg in 3 millennia ago. And to me, that meant creativity, product of your creativity, whether it's like a physical, like, I don't know, a microphone that you design, a book, whatever it is, it's something that has the potential to be indefinite, to be immortal. And so seeing it today, whatever your concept of time is or whatever, it could be the same as someone seeing it 3 millennia in the future. And so if they're seeing it 3 millennia in the future, then you're still looking at it at that time. So it's in the past. So just saying that whatever your creativity produces, that it has this potential to live on forever and exist in the world in some capacity forever.
So, Joy, not surprisingly, I had a very different take on that, or something that sort of merges into that. The fact that the egg is unchanging. She talks about the man who saw it. You see an egg today, as you said, 3,000, 3 million, however many years in the future. An egg is an egg is an egg. Every person who is listening to this, obviously, when I say egg, you have a specific shape of something that you are envisioning as an egg. What I thought was very interesting is that this was written in 1967. So I looked up what color were most eggs in Brazil in 1967, because I grew up with people who had farms, and chicken eggs, when they're laid, often are not white. They are multicolored. And she, in this story, repeatedly, Joy, I think you will remember this. She's like, the egg is white. The egg is perfect because it is white. She brings this whiteness concept out quite a bit. Is this a racial thing that you're bringing? The color of the skin? Are you bringing white as purity, as the beginning, as something? I did not know what she was up to, but it was very prominent that she is playing with these concepts. Can you please tell me what this is about? And she's like, I did, but I used all the concepts that were in my head, and you're going to have to sort them out for yourself. So I
Yeah,
think
good
that's why
luck.
this was such a challenge.
Yeah, I want to read that quote actually when she's talking about the color of an egg. So, the egg originated in Macedonia. There it was calculated fruit of the most arduous spontaneity. In the sands of Macedonia, a man holding a stick drew it and then erased it with his bare foot, which is what you were just saying. An egg is a thing that must be careful. That's why the chicken is the egg's disguise. The chicken exists so that the egg can traverse the ages. That's what a mother is for. The egg is constantly persecuted for being too ahead of its time. An egg for now will always be revolutionary. It lives inside the chicken to avoid being called white. The egg really is white, but it cannot be called white, not because that harms it, but people who call the egg white, those people die to life. Calling something white that is white can destroy humanity. Once a man was accused of being what he was, and he was called that man. They weren't lying, he was, but to this day, we still haven't recovered, one day after the next, the general law for us to stay alive. One can say a pretty face, but whoever says the face dies for having exhausted the topic. Now, that's rough. That's hard to interpret. But what I thought she was trying to say was, because we have this very old, something that could be prehistoric and prior to written language, it could have come from a time like that. If I'm reading it through the lens of creativity as the purpose of life, then when we sort of define something, and in this case, it's the egg is white. You made a good point, which I was thinking about as I was reading that section, is when someone says picture an egg, you think of an oval shape and it's white. Despite the fact that there are obviously eggs, like the Easter ones, the ones that chickens lay that are different colors. They could be speckled. They could be a multicolor one. They could be brown. They could be so many colors. It's a spectrum of color for chicken eggs. But for whatever reason, we think of this one symbol of a chicken egg being a white oval. And so if we define something, then we cannot, it's harder for us to break out of this mold. So if I'm thinking about creativity, thinking, oh, if I want to design, if I want to write a book, I have to follow a certain plot line. I have to have the right types of characters. I have to do all these things. And I mean, you could use Clarice Lispector as an example of you do not have to do that to be a successful writer. But I thought she was trying to say, like, don't let yourself get held up on this idea that something has to be the way it is when you want to create something. And the idea with this Macedonian man who's drawing an egg and erasing it is my idea was, or my interpretation was, this impermanence of your creativity, but the legacy of an egg as an oval, this still lives on. So the idea of this very specific shape of an egg continues, even though this man is long past. I have no idea if that's right.
Well, I think the entire conversation that we're having is all speculation on our part, and
Yeah.
any idea that anyone brings to the conversation is the correct idea, right? I think there are no wrong answers in this story. Joy, I think I mentioned to you offline, this felt to me a very male, female, what is a mother for? A mother is a vehicle to create other human beings, right? She's like, the
Or
chicken
chickens.
exists to be the transport for the egg. And I was like, okay, that is an interesting concept. And when she wrote that man, she capitalized the
Mhm.
T in that man. She could have said that human, but no, she used that man. And then that man was the man who came and erased. Right? She didn't say a woman was there with a stick drawing the eggs that she was collecting to feed her family. No, it was a man. Is she playing with male, female dynamics here in both ancient times and ancient retellings and also the current environment? And again, this was written in 1967, so it's on the cusp of a lot of change about women's ability to control their own fertility and a lot of things. And I was also, like, curious. I was like, okay, this is called The Egg and the Chicken. I had to look this up again. You'd think I should know this. Only female chickens lay eggs. They don't need a male egg to fertilize it. That is how more baby chickens get made, but eggs can still happen even if there are no males involved in that. So I'm like, okay. So it felt like this story that she's telling us, she keeps saying the chicken. And the chicken we know is not the rooster, right? It's not the boy chicken, it's the girl chicken. So she just keeps repeating as a narrator all of these things that felt to me very feminized about what is your role. Her quote, I'm not going to read the whole thing because there's a lot. What I don't know about the egg is what really matters. Like, huh? Right. And if you look at it from your lens, when you were saying, okay, maybe this is about creativity, maybe the thing we're most curious about when we're creating something is what we don't know about the thing that we're creating. It's not this great story that I
Mhm.
decided to tell and I have all the details. It's like, what's the space around it? And this male female dynamic just kind of kept coming back. And I think that, may be a reflection of kind of where I'm at in my headspace right now. But she said, an egg is inviolate. It is a perfect container. And she makes a note that when the person who would have crushed an egg, they did that because they were hungry. Because a person who has a concept of an egg is like, leave it alone, right? The egg is perfectly complete and 100% by itself. Why would you break it? And she's like, because that person is hungry. Hungry for food, hungry for power, hungry for domination, destruction. I don't know. She didn't tell us. Isn't that a curious way to put that out there?
Yeah, and I don't have a guess as to what she actually meant by any of this. I think that's what's so interesting because obviously we have very different interpretations of what this is, where you're seeing like the a gender role and sort of if you speak in binaries as like what is the purpose of a woman in this case? And the one that I just was reading and that you're talking about where she does, I didn't even remember that she specifically says a woman or mother's job is to carry the egg or whatever. So I could definitely see where you're coming from now, where I would not have thought of that.
And Joy, I have one more quote that I think will take you there with me. And this was what I was thinking about when we talked about it. It said, given, however, that her destiny is more important than she is, and given that her destiny is the egg, her personal life does not concern us. Then she goes on to say, the chicken who did not want to sacrifice her life, the one who chose wanting to be happy, in quotes, the one who didn't notice that if she spent her life designing the egg inside herself, as in an illuminated manuscript, she would be good for something. The one who didn't know how to lose herself. And so for me, again, it's identity, it is destiny. Do you have to have a child to be a woman to be fully realized? Are you selfish if you do? Are you selfish if you don't? It's 1967. A lot of these questions are coming to bear. But I just thought that was just really interesting. But back to your point about creativity, the example she uses is turning this into an illuminated manuscript, a piece of art and literature, right? It has both of those components. It's not just a visual feed. It is something absorbed with your brain. So I'm like, you got me.
Yeah, and as you're reading that and talking about it, I was thinking like, well, is there any commentary on infertility? Infertility is the correct way of saying it. That's how I said it. In my head, I said it wrong, but it came out right. Is this any comment on infertility in women and people that can have the potential to give birth? Because if she's trying to say that women purpose in life is to reproduce, like, I feel like that complicates maybe what she's trying to say, because if you're trying to say the act of reproduction is as perfect an idea as an illuminates manuscript, which takes a really long time. Well, maybe not now because we could just print it. But back in the day, okay, in the Middle Ages, this would have been extremely laborious. It would have been a very long process. It would have required a person with great skill who is an expert in their field. They would have to learn, they'd have to know how to read and write. So that was already a stretch, and be an artist and all of that kind of stuff. So, as if like that is why it is such a precious thing, because it takes so long to produce a child, I mean, and an illuminate
Yeah.
manuscript. So I wonder if that was what she was trying to say. Is she invalidating women or people that cannot give birth? I don't know. I don't know how she felt about it, but if that is how I was going to interpret it, that's what I would question in that section then.
Yeah, Joey, thank you for saying that, because one of the quotes, and I'm not sure I'll be able to lay my hand on it at this moment, that she said that a broken egg feels like blood. And when we were talking about, when I say think of an egg, we generally think of, and she said in here, a chicken's egg, right? We often say the egg, but we mean a chicken's egg, but we weren't being that specific, because I'm like, well, we could have spider's eggs. We could have
Uh-huh.
my ovaries produce eggs, and if they are not fertilized, they do turn into blood, right? So, like, she's just harkening on, like, very subtly around the edges. Why would she say a broken egg resembles blood? It doesn't. A broken egg is like clear stuff and orange stuff that, you break an egg, you don't get blood out of an egg ever. That's not where that comes from. So it was just such
Uh-huh.
an interesting, I'm like, why did you put that in there, miss? I don't understand that, unless you want me to draw, my life experience, unless you want me to draw some human reproductive parallels by saying, oh, this silly little chicken, she doesn't have any life. Her only job is to be a transport vessel for the next generation. It's like, what really matters? The next generation. It's like, but what about me? Because I'm literally here right now. Like, I think I
Uh-huh.
should matter in some way and not just what's coming after me. And so that's what resonated for me.
Which is now it's now I have to reread it, because with this idea of reproduction and menstruation and all that kind of stuff, because in the end, she talks about making breakfast for her children, and she's making eggs, obviously. What else would she be making at this story? And so it's like providing sustenance. It's like a life-giving material, and in this case, food. And if she's talking about an egg inside of an ovary, then that is also a sort of an item that produces life in some way, or has the potential to. So, yeah, I think that changes my view of this story and its whole purpose. I mean, I still think that my interpretation is valid. I'm not invalidating
I
myself.
love, yeah,
Yeah.
Joey, and I loved that you said, we're looking at it from very, very different angles. And I just want to add one more piece that for me sort of strengthens this argument about women, because this is where it got a little, I'm like, who's the she in this story? Because we have the narrator who's telling her story, but it says the chicken suffers from an unknown ailment. The chicken's unknown ailment is the egg. She doesn't know how to explain herself, in quotes. I know that the error is inside me. She calls her life an error. I don't know what I feel anymore, etc. Then she writes, etc., 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 is what the chicken clucks all day long. The chicken has plenty of inner life. To be honest, the only thing the chicken really has is her inner life. And so I was like, when she was saying, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we think, I'm like, hey, Joey, if you were 5 years old or 3 years old, probably 3 years old, we're going to do the barnyard animal sounds. And I said, what does the chicken say? And we would say, cluck, 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 right? It's not et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it made me think of like the early women's movement. And it's like, oh, we have some rights. Now we want some more rights. And now we want some more rights. And it just kind of like blah, 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 chicken, 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 all of this. And I could just see this sort of in my mind reading this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the fact that she says, I think there's something wrong with me and I can't describe it, but I know the problem is inside of me. I embody the problem. I was like, well, I disagree with that entirely, but I can see where she's coming from this angle. And I think of like the feminine mystique and all of these early feminist texts that kind of talk about like, hey, you want to know what like a horrible life is? It's staying home, trapped in a marriage with your children with no opportunity to be a different type of person. And I was like, but to your point, Joey, which I love that you take us to that ending where she's like, and here I am feeding eggs to my kids, contentedly going on with my life. I have fulfilled my destiny, right? Because she talks a lot about this, like, what's a chicken's destiny? It's like, well, you're either dinner or you're making
Yeah.
additional babies,
Yeah.
right? Baby chicks. And Joey, just one last thing that was coming up to me because back to the names for like a male chicken is called a rooster or a cock, right? We have cock of the walk. We have all of these rooster, these very male images. But an old hen, right, is a lady or a gaggle of ladies, kind of sitting on their eggs. Girls are often called chicks, like that's a really hot chick. It's just a very interesting way that we use these animal distinctions in our common language about male and female traits, characteristics, and behavior. So it's just like very interesting.
Mhm.
And why do we do that?
Yeah. That's an interesting point. I think I can see where this elliptical idea comes from in that summary that you gave because we have this like life cycle of an egg, where if an egg starts out like in an ovary, all right, I'm assuming chickens have ovaries. I don't know the anatomy of chickens, but in a woman, let's say, starts out an ovary and you introduce sperm. Obviously, everyone is aware of that at this point, and then she produces a child. Clarice Lispector in this case, or the narrator, I should say. I'm not saying it's Clarice Lispector herself. And then the egg is brought back into the equation as a way to feed this thing that once was an egg. And it's just like, I feel like, again, this where I'm like, am I high? Did I get high? And I'm just like contemplating like the weirdest stuff that just like doesn't make sense. But I'm like, I feel like there's something there. Like, there has to be something there. She's making a point, but I don't know what this point is. But I can definitely see the roles of women in this. And I especially think because there's this glimpse of domesticity at the end that doesn't really fit here because we spend basically the entire text talking about the relationship between a chicken and an egg, or an egg and a chicken in this case. And so then we randomly kind of pivot to human beings and how they're interacting with with an egg and a chicken. Well, they don't have chicken at this time. Maybe they'll have chicken for dinner after the story ends, but they're consuming an egg. And so I think it's just an odd dynamic and relationship between like what is the purpose of an egg? Like I'm talking about like an actual egg, like in an ovary at this point. What purpose does it serve? And like I don't know. Again, I feel like I was tripping. Like, I'm like, what did I take? Am I drunk?
Relatable, Joey. Neither one of us would know what being on a trip is like, but we can imagine. We've read a lot of literature. And it is interesting because now I am taking this to the literal chicken's egg, which is now providing sustenance for her children, which she has birthed, apparently. We don't know that for sure, but I'm making an assumption that these are her
Yeah.
biological children, which went through this process. And one of the things that she said in talking about the chicken, but she personalized the chicken because she says the chicken has an I, like the letter I, like I myself, the chicken. I am speaking as myself, the chicken. And when she's talking about the inner life of this chicken, that she is giving us, or she's fulfilled her destiny as the chicken by having the eggs. But now this woman has fulfilled her destiny as a woman, perhaps as having children. And now she's able to feed the chicken who fulfilled their destiny to feed her actual human offspring. So it's like this, as you said, it's this weird circle of life situation. And she goes on to say something about her being the narrator, the human being in the story, about her own personal life. And it's like, what is my personal life and what am I doing here? And it just was very interesting. Yeah, it just for me, it was very interesting because we also have a phrase in my family of running around like a chicken with your head cut off, right? It's this craziness, it's this very flighty that, you think that chickens aren't very intelligent. And in part of the story, she says, you think the chicken is not doing anything, but the moment you come to steal her eggs or her life, her life is in danger, she screams bloody murder, right? That she is really causing a ruckus. So it's like not too dumb to survive in the world that she is placed. And so I extrapolated that with the early feminist movement, what might be happening in those countries, in South American countries in the late 60s when this was written. And it's just a very interesting thing for me to contemplate as a person at this age in my life, thinking about how much has changed since she wrote this story and how much remains completely unchanged, right? Right now, adult human females are the only ones who can generate a live child, right? Like we haven't replaced that technology. We haven't outsourced that to anyone else. Like the mechanics of that remain the same. And I think that was when she takes us back before I was born, after I died, the man on the moon. She talks about the moon is made of eggs. Like she just has all of these weird things about time and the timelessness of an egg, that technology, that packaging, that mechanism never changes. And I'm like, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I think it's important as you're talking about the time period that she wrote this in and then it was published. It seems pretty integral to this text because I think it is probably showing or helps us understand more of what she was trying to get at. Because if we read it sort of anachronistically and without that tidbit in mind, I don't know if this is what she was trying to say. I have no idea. Saying that the moon is made of eggs, I have no idea what that means. I don't, I don't know. Maybe she did a lot of drugs. But I think it's important for me once I go to reread this to keep that in mind. Like, what does this mean? What were the everyday lives of women and the restriction in the late 60s, and specifically in Brazil, obviously, because that's where she lived? And how does that affect her perception of life? I mean, she was a successful writer, even in her day, in her era, while she was alive. So it wasn't that she didn't have sort of the autonomy to write as she wanted and find success as a woman in Brazil in late 1960s. But I'm sure there's still restrictions on social norms and taboos that she doesn't want to break or engage with in case of a taboo. And so I'm sure that was certainly affecting her quality of life if she wanted to do something else. And so maybe this is really just a contemplation of what is a woman's purpose in life. And in this case, I'm always speaking in binary, but um, like what was the purpose of her life? Did she think that maybe society saw her as only a reproductive tool instead of being this autonomous, creative person that had a lot more to offer the world and not just reproduction. Although, if you want to do that, great. I don't know why you would want to. Kids are awful. They ruin everything. They ruin your life. But if you wanna have kids, I don't know, go ahead.
Well, Joey, I can say that I am very grateful to your parents for deciding to have this marvelous child called Joey plus Dylan, who was a two for one special
Mhm.
for your family. And Joey, what was interesting for me when you said, why did she put the moon in there? She also talks about space, that an egg in space still remains the space, it still retains its shape. I looked up, I'm like, when did we get the first images from space? Like, there's these very iconic photographs of when they landed on the moon in July of 1969, which was after she wrote this, but they were still doing some, like, the space race had been instituted in the United States. She
Mhm.
probably would have been aware of that stuff was going forward. And so I think the idea that the space race was in her mind was there. And because the moon, when I think of the moon, what do you think? I think of this big white oval. And when she makes so many references, it's like eggs are white, white is great. We love white eggs. That I was like, some people said the moon was made of cream cheese, right? And so we're like, well, maybe she just was making a little playfulness of like, well, you don't know what's on the moon. Maybe it's just covered with eggs.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at that point, they didn't know that it was rock. So she was like, "It's totally valid. That could be an egg up there. I have no idea."
That is really something. We have covered a lot of ground here on this Clarice Lispector. And if you had one word or one image that pops into your mind as a result of reading this story, and it can't be the egg, so
Damn.
forget about it. What was this experience like? What does that evoke for you?
Okay, I'm gonna be very modernist in my answer, I think. I think this is gonna be a very modernist answer. I'm gonna say that my image is I want people to think of themselves staring at their own reflection in a mirror.
I really like that, Joey, right? It's like the concept of you is faced with the reality of you, which is only the concept of you made real. Interesting.
Maybe that's what I mean. I'll never tell because
You never tell. I'm
this is
like,
my
that's what that means to
modernist
me.
moment, and I'm not telling you what I mean.
Oh, right. Modernist, incomprehensible to the average man or woman
Yeah.
who is trying to do that. It's a choose your own adventure. So the image that popped into my head when I was thinking of this is like a snake chasing its tail, because just when we thought we had some understanding of like, okay, this is about creativity, this is about the passage of time, this is about timelessness, then she throws in these ideas about female power and reproductive things. And it's like, wait a minute, pick a lane. Which is it? And she's like, it's all of the things. It's just this circular nature that will never be solved. And Joey, what I really did appreciate about the story is that it was so difficult. And we knew from the opening sentence when she sets us up, which came first in the United States, we often say the chicken or the egg. She doesn't even give it to us straight in that way. She's like, oh, no, it's the egg and the chicken. I'm like, no, it's the chicken and the egg. And I
Yeah.
could just see us having that debate back and forth and back. Like, no one wins. It is a non winnable conversation, but it also makes you think, so, well, where did the first egg come from? Because they had to come from a chicken, but there was no chicken. So how did the egg get there? So it's just one of those
Dinosaurs.
mysteries of the universes that will never be solved. And I do appreciate her using that story in my mind to reflect these overwhelming questions about who you are, how you become yourself. Do you have a destiny? Do other people have a part in that? Does that man, as she put it very clearly in that story, does he have a say in it? Can he erase you and your existence with a swipe of his bare foot? I don't know, but very interesting little tidbits.
Right, but I suggest everyone read it because it's worth the struggle of getting through it, and maybe you'll
Yes,
see a
the
different
juice is
thing.
worth Yeah, the juice is worth the squeeze, right, Joey? And this is the fourth story that we have done in our Stream of Consciousness series. Each week we have ratcheted up the complexity. And I think this is a very beautiful capstone to the end of the short stories. And next week, we are going to talk about our experience of reading the novel Ulysses, which by many, many accounts, except for yours, Joey, is one of the hardest
No,
stream
it
of
is.
consciousness.
It certainly is. I'm just saying if I had to compare them.
They're equivalent in their difficulty.
Yeah, I'll say what I was gonna. Well, I'll expand on that in that episode there.
Well, yeah, stay tuned for details on that, but I am really looking forward, Joey, to wrapping up our stream of consciousness with the granddaddy of them all. I think many scholars and normal folks who just like to read will say, Ulysses, what in the world is possibly going on with there? So I'll see you next time, Joey.
See ya.